Love it here.
Oh, it must be so nice. I met somebody the other day down here, actually, the first day I arrived. And one of the first people I met was from Katoomba. And I was like, oh, it's one of my favorite places in the world. I love Katoomba. And so synchronicities. Yeah, it's so nice up in the mountains. And there was that torrential rain a couple of weeks ago that was really, major floods. And it's still going, is it? I didn't realize.
No, not really. It was the first time I looked down a sort of valley, and it was the first time I could see the river in the distance. Normally I can look and see it right in front of me. I could see it to the left and the right. It had risen so high that it was for the first time in 11 years that I've seen it, and I've never seen it that high. And but it's a special place, the mountains, I think, because you've got access to the cities about 3 hours out. It attracts a lot of people wanting a very different way of life, but also wanting access to cities, and often living off the grid, growing their own food, all the things, wholesome things we like to do. And we don't need land for that. Of course, we can do that on our own balcony, or even under grow lights we can talk about.
Yeah. Well, when I eventually find myself a piece of land or something somewhere, I'm definitely going to be doing some growing. I wouldn't say I'm the most green-thumbed kind of person. I'm not really. I'm good with animals. I haven't been so good with plants so far, but there's always learning opportunities, and it's nice to. I definitely want to have a home that's like surrounded by lots of plants and and do my own growing. So I'll probably ask you for some tips and advice when I get to that point.
It's interesting because it sort of lends itself to I'll let you open up the conversation formally in a moment, I guess, but it's when you start, we say things like that, don't we? Oh, I'm not one of those green people or whatever. But, always as if we have to do something to the environment. And one thing I've really learned is we have to work with the environment. We don't grow tomatoes. We create the conditions which help them. Nature does very well on its own, usually if human beings leave her alone. But what's interesting is, and I've learned this from many people who know Carl Levere. He used to run a market garden, beautiful vegan down in Canberra, a dear friend of mine. And I was saying there's so many snails and there's so many slugs. And of course, they're all living creatures that, I prefer them not to be on my vegetables, but I'm certainly not going to use any heavy hand to get rid of them. And he said, you've got to realize that over time, how we've destroyed our food systems, plants actually have their own immune system, and it's been destroyed in the same way we destroy our own. So much is rebuilding that in the same way that through a whole food plant-based diet we can energize and make ourselves robust. We need to help the land too. We've raped it literally, and so many poisons have been put on it. And it's quite extraordinary when you work with nature and you really get to know the conditions. And I get really personal. It's like if it's a really cold night, I'm wanting to get out there the next day to check on everything. And I feel personally responsible if it's too cold or the frost is coming. I haven't covered things up. So
yeah, well, they're like your little babies, I guess. As you say, you've created the condition for them to grow.
Right. And
it's up to us, I guess, as like the caretakers or the stewards of the earth, of the planet, to be looking after these beings, whether they're plant or animal or human form. So I guess so to get into tonight, I'd love to hear your story and your take on the psychological side of becoming vegan and shifting into more of a whole food kind of plant-based diet, and what that means for our minds, our mental health. I, for one, have definitely, when I first went vegan, it was difficulties with feelings of guilt, of sadness that I'd unwittingly been part of this world for so long, and been responsible for a lot of pain. And I know a lot of people will find that will resonate with that, or will feel they've been through the same kind of shifts. So from your perspective and your point of view as a psychologist, what's your journey been like working with activists and working with vegans, and how do you see that as like the psychological side of becoming vegan or leaving the
Yeah.
animal industries?
Sure. It's well, I've been a psychologist a long time, actually, probably 30 years. It's hard to imagine that time's passed so much and like that. So I was a psychologist for a good 20 years before I became vegan. And although I just, you know my story personally, but others may not. It was over, oh gosh, 40 years ago that I actually, I say, gave up meat. You know, I became aware just purely by reading a book called Is That It by Bob Geldof when he worked in an abattoir. And I didn't see anything or hear anything, but in that moment, I'm telling you, I can see what was going on. And I just didn't want to be part of that. And naively, didn't even know the word vegan then, is I, thought I don't want to be part of this. Must be some really bad apples and bad industry practices in Ireland, but I don't want to be part of it. So effectively became a vegetarian. And thank goodness I was not a baby calf and became allergic to dairy products. So that went into my life as well. So there was a big transition. And I look back on that now and I wonder, as we're advocating to people today, and we wonder why people won't change, why didn't I ask any more questions? You know, I obviously been so moved by reading that book that I stopped in an instant. It just wasn't something I was going to be part of. And I didn't ask any more questions. And that's something for us all now, is what else is beyond veganism that we don't even know. We have to ask the questions. And but it was only 11 years ago when I became far more aware of what was going on in the industry. So I lived in New Zealand, did some homework and became instantly a vegan. I just could not be part of that. And then I thought, how have I been duped for so long? Why didn't I ask those questions? Which is what we do. But I guess I then became an activist right away. So speaking at things like live export rallies and speaking out against factory farming and animal experimentation, people approached me and said, you know, can I come and see you? I need to see a psychologist, maybe about life's problems beyond veganism. But I just don't want to talk to a non-vegan, because how can they understand me? If they really got it, they'd have to be vegan. And the non-vegan therapist might think that's a little bit smug, because after all, the therapist doesn't need to experience everything other people have experienced to empathize. But I think it's because of the ubiquitous nature of animal abuse. We can't be a little bit pregnant. We, unless we take actual steps to not be part of the cruelty, we will be part of the cruelty. And I think that's why people find it very hard talking to doctors, psychologists, social workers, coaches who either don't get it and think it's okay, or are psychopaths. And most people aren't psychopaths. So they've just had, the veil has not yet been lifted. So I've seen a lot of people, as you know, Lucy, we've talked over the years of people that feel the anguish of knowing about the systematized cruelty towards animals. And then when they ask that question, they feel just by telling people they'll have to become vegan right away. Don't we all experience that? I just have to tell people in the world to become vegan. And I think that's one of our biggest shock, is the scale of the problem and how much suffering. The second one is, even when I tell people, they don't change. Not everybody. And then we go, well, if I didn't know about all these things, and 1.8 trillion animals being killed a year, if we, on average, we're only guessing really of how many fishes and crustacea. What else don't I know? And then we'll call it a conspiracy theorist. So we've got this particular psychology, I think, attached to veganism, which, as you know, I've named vystopia, which a lot of people will know. And I guess I've just given the definition of it there. So please interject at any point rather than me continuing to talk. But I guess that identifies this deep anguish, and then asking about a world that no longer makes sense. And then that journey, not only to have to come to terms with the cruelty, but also asking, well, who are we? What are we capable of? And who's duping us, and why? You must have asked those questions. I know you have yourself, Lucy.
Yeah, I think it's there's so many of us now who are waking up to the nature of reality, the nature of the world, like the levels and layers of programming that we have been that have been like placed on us. And as you say, it goes back a long, long way. Like, it goes back thousands of years, really. But now we're at a point in our evolution that so many people are realizing there's a lot more that's going on behind the scenes, and asking those questions and having like an inquiring mind, as most activists would have. We do a lot of research, we think about things, we ask ourselves questions, we ask each other questions, and I think that's a mark of people who become active and who become vegan probably more easily are the ones who are open to knowing that we don't know everything, and that there is so much more that we can learn, rather than thinking that it's we've got everything sussed and we know the way that the world is. We just don't. So there's a lot of people who are now realizing that this system is broken, and that there's so much more going on behind the scenes, and it's I guess up to us and our free will to make changes associated with that help us remove ourselves from systems that are exploitative. From your experience and your work with Vystopia, what do you see as the main sort of issues for people when they exit that matrix?
Yeah, I think number one is vegans have all the normal problems of life, and then we throw dystopia on the top. So people, we're trying to make sense of our life, and by the time we get to know ourselves, we've been so normalized and socialized, and so many layers of trance-making, so many shoulds, oughts, musts of who we think we are. And I certainly think we've been duped into believing we're all separate. And I think quantum science is catching up with this now. And I encourage people to look at the work of people like Greg Braddon and Lynn Taggart, and I'd love to talk about her work lately, and a personal experience I've had recently of the power of intention, and realizing that everything we think and feel is contributing to this thing called life and consciousness. It's not that we're individuals and that's a bad person over there and he's a good person and she's good and he's bad. We are all expressions of ourselves, of each other in many ways, and the things we see going on in the world to some extent is a reflection of ourselves. And that's hard to experience, isn't it? Because you think, well, I'm not out there abusing people, but where are we abusive to ourselves? Where are we violent towards ourselves, judging, and then that we see that back in our world and we're judged. It's and it's not to sound simplistic, but I think Lucy, have we ever talked about Dr. E. Oliokolu Hugh Len, the lovely Hawaiian healing doctor? I'm sure your listeners would like to hear about him. If I may.
I've never heard of him, so I don't think we've spoken about him. People, I'm sure, would love to hear about that as well.
Yeah. Well, it really highlights, I suppose, the fact that we are all part of this. And of course, when vegans wake up and they go, oh my gosh, I've come into this reality, it's almost like a them and us feeling. And we've always got to go full circle again to realize that the blinkers I don't like that blinkers because it's obviously related to animal abuse and animals being covers over their eyes. But, the veil has been lifted. And we tend to think the world's in darkness. Only they become vegan, the world would be a better place. Well, yes, it would be, but really veganism, i.e. the non-use and non-exploitation of this particular species, it's another ism, speciesism, is part of this. We bring ourselves back to ground zero. We stop taking what was not ours. We either believe in cruelty or we don't. We either believe in superiority or we don't. And it's as simple as that. Whether we do that with gender, whether we do it with race, whether we do it with body size, whether we do it with animals, different species. But if we look at this whole notion that we're all part of global consciousness, and I think we have great opportunity at this time in our history. But I remember hearing this story, and it kind of changed a lot of, or crystallized for me a lot of that thinking. And I was living in New Zealand at the time, and it was actually a Hawaiian healing doctor. And people can go and do their own research. He's been examined, investigated, interviewed enormously. He was a doctor called Dr. E. Oliokolu Hugh Len.
That's such a cool name. Wow.
Great Hawaiian name, Dr. Hugh Len. And he was a Hawaiian healing doctor, for want of a better word, but I believe he was medically trained, probably as a psychiatrist. And he was asked to, must be going back, and I haven't got my dates here, but we can Google this and look at this. But say 80s, 90s, he was working at the Hawaiian State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. And a lot of doctors had worked there, head of departments who were the psychiatrists, and they just couldn't get the staff to stay there. The nursing staff would leave. It was a terrible place of the most heinous crimes, like multiple rapes and murders and real serial killers, ghastly stuff. And most of the inmates were literally just controlled. They were heavily sedated, they were shackled. The staff used to walk with their backs against the hospital walls because they were attacked and spat at. It was you imagine this dark situation. So very little rehabilitation could be done because it was such a dangerous situation. And as the story goes, and you can research it yourself, is Dr. Hugh Len was asked, will you come and work here? Just work here, please. We haven't got anyone to be head of department. And he said, I will work there as long as I don't see any of the patients. Nice work if we can get it. And so you've got a psychiatrist in a mental institution with criminally insane people, and he's not going to do any therapy. But they were so desperate, as the story goes, but he would oversee things. I'm sure there were other forms of rehabilitation going on. And the long and the short of it is, and it was investigated, he was only there for about 5 years. And when he's interviewed, they say, Dr. Hugh Len, is it true you worked at the Hawaiian State Hospital for the Criminally Insane between this year and this year? And he said, yes. Is it true that during the first few years, they started to unshackle the patients? The nursing staff stayed. They started to rehabilitate people and give them more freedom. They said, yes. He said, is it true that in 5 years, the hospital, people were rehabilitated and the hospital closed? He said, yes. And they said, is it true in 5 years you never saw a patient? He said, yes. And they said, well, how is this possible? And he said, well, do you believe in the law of attraction, basically? He said, do you believe that everything that comes into your life at some level is a reflection of yourself? You know, we get back what we give out. So if we're angry and grumpy, people don't smile at us in the same way. Or we are generous to people, there is a coming back. And the interviewer of many, Dr. Joe Vitale was one of them, and said, yeah, I do believe that. He said, well, if a heinously, criminally insane madman came into your life, didn't you help create him too? Whoa, that is such a shift in personal development experience. And the person said, well, yes. Now think of vegans. We come across the slaughterhouse. Did we help create that at some level? Obviously, we're not doing that to animals, but where are we part of a system of violence towards ourselves, towards harsh words, judgment? Anyway, they said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I believe that everything that comes into our life is an opportunity to hold up a mirror for our own healing. And if we want to heal the world, we have to heal that part of ourselves that at some level resonates with that. And he said, what I would do, I would be given the file in the most awful court sort of details, the photographs of these awful, heinous criminal crimes. I would feel sick, I would feel nauseous, I'd feel angry. He said, but whatever it was, I would read the document, and whatever I felt, I allowed to come up, whether it was rage, anger, despise the person. And I said 3 things. I said, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, 4 things. And he said, I'm sorry, I didn't realize what it was in me that needed to be cleared up in order to shift the outer reality. Please forgive me. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to actually clean up my own backyard. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity of having this mirror given to me so I can clean up myself and contribute to this whole energetic field. And the last one was, I love you, which of course is the most powerful. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. He said that's all he did. And sometimes he would look at a file for a week. Sometimes he would look at it for 6 months. But when it went, and he said there was this shift in him, he put the file away and went on to the next one. Now, that is really interesting stuff that when it first came out, probably in the 90s, I started reading about it. It was way out there, you know. Now we're starting to look at Dr. Bruce Lipton's work, Greg Braden's work, Power of Intention, Peaceful Cities projects, the fact that the outer is the inner. It doesn't seem so far-fetched. And it's really the domain of quantum science and quantum reality, which it teaches us a lot, hey? So as vegans, the stuff we become aware of, it's our opportunity to be of service, really, to be part of the solution. Don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, that's such a cool story. I think is it Ho'oponopono is the name of the prayer?
Yeah, it's called self-identity, Ho'oponopono. It's self-identity. So whatever is in the outside. And so we see all these ills in our society, don't we? Depression, anxiety, eating disorders, a lot of disordered ways of life. And we tend to think it's out there. I'm normal and you're okay, or I'm not normal and I'm part of it. All of us have had our struggles. But when we start to realize that, it is a spiritual war we're in, really, spiritual, and we've got to clean up our own part of this, add to our generosity, and be generous towards people rather than judging people that haven't yet opened their eyes to not be part of the heinous cruelty to our animals, certainly in the vegan movement.
Yeah, and I think it can take a lot of self-awareness, a lot of recognition, a lot of releasing fears, a lot of releasing guilt and shame and all these things to actually accept and step into a different way of living that's so completely different from the way that we have been. And I guess even if it's not even that different a lifestyle, it's the shift in consciousness and the release of those more negative emotions. The guilt is a big one for a lot of people. Definitely was for me, still is for a lot of things, but in terms of moving away from the animal industries, it's we've really got to look within. And as you say, it's interesting. I don't think I've heard many people talk about that aspect of in a sense, like being responsible for it even happening in the first place. We're all part of it. Even as vegans, we might, we've extracted ourselves from the system, but we also, it's the power of our thoughts, what we focus on, and I guess in a sense it kind of brings me to the idea of like our own exposure to the footage of what goes on, and what are your thoughts on that, and how much does that, as activists and as vegans who we know what goes on, we see it, if we're an activist and we're like on the streets or we're sharing a lot of footage, how does that influence, or our own influence in that, does that kind of perpetuate, or do you think, how do we find that balance?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I'm also a street activist, I think there are many ways to get a message out, to make people aware, not to shame them or blame them out there, but to realize, until people actually see the extent of what they're being duped into being part of, because I don't think people can quite believe the extent to which we have been duped to be part of such a heinous level of cruelty. I always say to people, don't over traumatize yourself with these things. Once you become aware and you make, you extract yourself as far as possible, because sometimes we are part of a system. There's animal products in this computer as I look at it. Does that mean I don't have a computer? Therefore, would that be more beneficial to animals or less beneficial in terms of getting a message out there? But for me, it's very, once you've seen it, you don't want to re-traumatize yourself. And I know there are a lot of vegans that actually say, well, I need to see everything. If animals are suffering like that, I need to see it. And you've got to ask the question is, how does that serve you and how does it serve the animals? If we are not resourced and we're so pained and traumatized all the time, we can't be of service to them. I've watched Dominion 3 times when I'm emceeing, once alone, and then a couple of 2 or 3, probably 4 times now. When I'm being of service to then speak at an event, for instance, or launch it, or which was at the beginning. I can only watch it around other activists, actually. I don't watch any of this stuff when I'm got to prepare for something on my own. I find that far too traumatic. And when I have got to, I usually turn the sound down and the lighting down, because I've seen so much. and never underestimate that trauma that it causes us to, you know, we find it hard to think that fellow humans can be part of something so dark. And but you know, I think it's important that we witness with our eyes what these animals do experience with their bodies, but not to do it from a position of guilt or shame. I've got to do it because they're now suffering. The animals don't need us to be more traumatized. They need us to take action to end these practices, to come away from that. But it's and I think we're born in trauma to some extent, because if anybody's read any, I was trained both as a psychologist and also in existential psychotherapy, the philosophy of what it is to exist, right? And I always remember there was a lovely writer called R.D. Laing, and I came upon him because he was one of the first people to question schizophrenia. And he said, schizophrenia is not an escape into madness, it's escape from madness. And so my ears pricked up. He said, you know, this thing we call normality drives people crazy. And for some people, there is such a destructive upbringing they have that they really are invaded by other people, their own little identity. And so they escape from madness as opposed to into it. And it'd take a lot to, you've got to go and read his work to go and look at that. He wrote a book called The Divided Self. It has a lot of merit, but he was, and I hope I'm not going off on a tangent, but just to raise these issues. He was working he was a Scottish psychiatrist, and he worked in what was called a mental institution, like a big institution, you know, where they sort of had people in straitjackets and probably traumatized these poor souls even more. But he went into a situation there was with two other psychiatrists, all with nice white coats on and clipboards, you know, making people feel really at home. And there was this person in there who had no clothes on, who had defecated everywhere and used their own excrement to put it on the walls and all over themselves. And so these psychiatrists went in and said, this person's obviously mad. And do you know what R.D. Laing did? It was the biggest shift in my understanding of psychiatry, and because I've worked in psychiatry as well. He took his clothes off and got into the fetal position, or, you know, into that bowed fetal position with this person to sat next to him. And he started rocking with him. And it took about half an hour, maybe a little longer. And this guy talked for the first time he'd ever talked to anyone in all the years in the institution. Because R.D. Laing had come alongside that guy, as opposed to in a white coat thinking, oh, we need to medicalize this person. Okay. And therefore that opened the gateway to start asking questions about what our trauma and our madness is. And he wrote a lovely book called Bird of Paradise. I think it was in there. And he makes this quote. And I get it a little bit wrong, but I paraphrase a little bit. He said, when Stone Age baby meets his or her 20th century mother, they are subjected to the most outrageous violence masquerading as love. He said, and on the whole, it's a relatively successful enterprise, because by the age of 16, it's relatively successful, and we are left with a half-crazed creature rather like ourselves. And really what he's talking about is this, we indoctrinate each other, you know, mom and dad, you know, hopefully we have good enough parenting. And I know some people listening have had very traumatic upbringings, and others have, you know, parents do their best, you know. It doesn't mean all parents go around to abuse, but the fact that they're trying to show love by getting us to fit into society is a breakdown of all our potentialities in many ways. And it spends the rest of our life trying to undo the, I should do that, I must do that, I ought to do that. I feel guilt, I feel shame, I'm doing something wrong, or I'm not enough. And that's what he talks about, the outrageous violence. And he mirrors what Einstein said, I had a great education, which was temporary when I went to school, which was temporarily interrupted by when I had to go to school. So, you know, these are now coming to the fore, I think, at this time in our history when we have to start asking questions. How are we all living? Of which our eating of animals and abuse of animals is a part of this. But it's part of a bigger form of oppression and abuse and superiority and cruelty. And, you know, do we want to be part of the solution or part of the problem?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Do we want to be part of the solution? Definitely do. You know, we want to make as big of an impact in a positive way. Well, yeah, influence the world positively as much as we possibly can, and help shift perceptions, raise awareness, raise the consciousness of the planet. And I love the story that you told about the psychiatrist sitting with the man and just being there with him. That reminds me of a story that Lisa told this morning when we had our discussion earlier about just sitting with the animals, you know, how we go to vigils, or even if there's, you know, an animal on the side of the road who's maybe been hit by a car, or a cat or a dog, somebody who just needs support, and just being there with them and supporting them, and just giving them love, and just being there as their support is really beautiful. And we can definitely, yeah, we can do that with other humans as well, and with our own selves, you know, giving ourselves the love and support that we hope for, you know, for ourselves from others as well. So it's, yeah, I love that story. That's really cool. I had a question. Where did it go? Yeah, in what way do you feel that we can do that for each other? If we know somebody who is, you know, making that shift, how can we as a support system support them in that way? How can we be, you know, the best friends or family members or supports for those people who are going through that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a couple of things. I think it's meeting people where they're at. That's one sure thing. And not judging people. It's like when we start talking about veganism to people, you know, we think, oh, great, I'm in there, they're listening a bit. We just want to go the whole lot. And sometimes we just have to lay the feast out in front of people and realize that we've all been duped, we've all been lied to, and we've been put into a almost hypnotic spell of this thing called reality. And so sometimes just looking at our own change, how we've changed over time and opened our eyes. And I think being generous towards people, but and just listening to people. People are desperate to be listened to, and not just listened to be heard. And we can only do that when we truly actively listen, really. We keep an open mind, we try to hold back our assumptions, and we be curious. And if you look at what's happening in our world at the moment, this huge polarization, you know, the world has been gripped by this massive shift and change, and there's a polarization. Is this deadly virus and nobody's taking it seriously and we all must? Or is it, oh, they're all conspiracy theorists over there? When did we lose that perspective where we sort of stopped saying, well, you know, say, Lucy, you come up with a different perspective on what's happening in the world at this moment globally, and I go, oh, no, I don't believe that. You've got to be a conspiracy theorist. When did we learn to do that, as opposed to saying, well, look, Lucy, I know you. You're someone who does a lot of homework, a lot of work on yourself. You know, maybe there's something you know that I don't. Tell me more. But I think our beliefs have become part of our identity. And so if somebody challenges you on something, it's almost like, are you telling me I'm stupid? Are you telling me? And that's part of that collective shaming that's been going on. So ensure and be generous with people and ask questions about where they're at, where, you know, try not to judge people, often judge people when they're not as active as we want them to be. You know, how can I be of service is a good example of that. So at an individual level is being alongside people, being real with people, hearing people. We only do that when we check out that what they're saying is what they intended. Open-ended questions, paraphrasing back at them, some of the basic active listening skills, which are gold. And I've had $1 for every person who's come to see me, and I've hardly said anything for a whole session. And at the end, they go, oh my gosh, I'm so much clearer now. Thank you. Changed my life. And I actually didn't say anything, but they felt my presence being there, holding them and not judging them. And perhaps just holding a mirror back at different times for them to come back into their own driving seat of their life. I say people are the leaders of their own life, but there's unconscious aspects we have of ourselves. And really it's by coming together and holding up that image, that mirror, our life experience, that they get a chance to become the conscious leaders. So I think that's the first one. The second one, and I'd love to talk about this, is the power of intention. When we come together collectively, there's something magical that happens. And I think I've talked about this at World Vegan Day and things like this. And I mentioned earlier the Peaceful Cities projects, and that was peacefulcities.org. And I encourage people to go and look at when people come together and meditate on peace in a certain area. It's hugely correlated, more meditation, focused meditation on a specific area. It's correlated with reductions in crime, in looting, in vicious attacks, reports to police, muggings, all sorts of things. Peaceful Cities projects, and when they take it away, it goes back. There was also the transcendental meditation studies, similar sort of things. When we stop meditating, that happens. People coming together collectively. But I came across Lynn McTaggart's work 20 years ago. It's called The Field, and where she's an investigative reporter originally, and then she started to look at what was known as New Age, which incredibly old age, is a way of minimizing it. Oh, that's New Age, or that's complementary. Well, complementary is about 10,000 years old, that are documented, and more. Allopathic modern medicine's 200 years old. So, there's something, it's judgment, isn't it, again? But anyway, she was looking at correlations between when people had treatments that are not scientific, so to speak, and the correlations between their healing and this lovely, sort of increase in the belief in them being healed by different methodologies, non-invasive methods and healing. But she was kind of criticized because they were only correlations, tendencies that when that changed, that changed. So over the last few years, she's been really the architect of what's known as the intention experiments. And she set up scientific experiments to look at the power of intention. So when people come together in groups with a specific intention, not just a generalized one, let's just meditate on Lucy's well-being, we'll meditate on Lucy not having migraines. So something specific. And she has been showing, for the skeptical people, the cause and effect. So you could have a group of people focusing on Lucy's well-being, and there might be some changes, but nothing significant. When a group of people come together and meditate specifically on Lucy's thing, there is an immediate cause and effect. And when they stop it, or they don't do it, there's no change. She did 33 experiments. In 29 of them, they have shown real cause and effect, and some of them statistically significant. So I really encourage people to go and look at that, and she looked at what's called the Power of Eight, and fantastic book, because she said on the optimum group to come together is 8 people. Okay, and we also know this in team building. Now, about 2.5 weeks ago, and Lucy, you know this, a dear, beautiful rescue dog of mine, had less than a year, I thought she was 10, she's nearer 14, was viciously attacked by a neighbor's visitor's dog. So much so that her hip was dislocated. She was shaken so badly. She had a terrible gash to her stomach. We didn't know whether she'd be incontinent. She lost several teeth. Her internal organs were affected. And she was rushed in to have treatment. She had a hip ball and socket kept coming out, so she had hip surgery. And then there was a terrible increase in temperature. The legs swelled up 3 times the size. You can see the story. It's going down. First, they thought she'd improved. And now she's on death's door. And they wanted to operate again and open up wounds and clean them out. And then I remembered Lynn McTaggart's work. And I thought, well, what about putting our money where our mouth is? And I called together a group of beautiful vegans that also know Brodie. And we did a meditation circle focusing specifically. They said, if it doesn't come down 24 hours, we're going to have to operate because she's going to die. And I sort of made a commitment to her. I didn't want to take her to the emergency hospital. I didn't intuitively feel right, but I was prepared to help her further. And we meditated on her swelling coming down, so much so that, and the enzymes in her muscles and liver to come down, and her temperature, so that the surgery was not necessary to reopen the wound. And we all meditated on this. And actually, I also did. I'm sorry, please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. And the next day, the vet rang. And I kept seeing this visualization of me taking the heat out of the wound lowering it, feeling it almost through my own body. The next day, the vet rings and she said, I don't know if she's done it, but she's pulled it off. The leg's gone down. The liver muscle enzymes are just 50 above normal. She said, let me give you an example. If there was a snake bite, she said, we let her out of hospital 3,000 above normal. So it's pretty good. Everything's come down. I don't think we need to do surgery. And within 3 days, she had come home with her legs toggled together, with a wound that needs to be cleaned. And she's not incontinent. And they still say, we don't know. We can tell you now, we actually thought she wouldn't live. So there's the power of intention. And it's also to do with when we believe, when we just put it out there willy-nilly and just hope for the best. When we believe without a shadow of a doubt, miracles do happen. We know Bruce Lipton's work, the power of belief. People's health changes, even though they didn't have the surgery they've been told they've had for arthritis or something, and yet they're running around as if they've had this. So in answer to your question, I think there's when we can individually connect, be there, be real, come alongside another being. Another one is learn to meditate and learn the power of intention and come together with others and usher in this great new world that we want. Don't focus on the doom and gloom, but be mindful of it and do our due diligence, and then realize that. And one thing Lynn McTavish said is it wasn't just the focus of the meditations in her 33 studies, and very big studies, up to 10,000 people collectively she had done. She said it was the people that were meditating that themselves had greater clarity, had physical healings, just by being instruments for healing others.
Wow, yeah, that's powerful that it's the reflection came back to them as well, that they, having done the work to put the intention out to support and help others heal, they themselves were healing as well. That's so beautiful, because we are all reflections of each other. We are all part of the one, and so of course, if we are having our intentions and we're putting out a certain frequency, that's what's going to, it's inevitably going to make a difference. So there's a question here as well. And I had a question as well about nonviolent communication, which came up yesterday, I think. I'll just read this. So Kim says, this coherency, feeling of harmony with everyone and also harmony inside ourselves is so healing. The group of planet coherency has weekly meditations in this. I have a bioresonance device that has different programs of pure vibrations. Wow. Mm-hmm. You can also use these vibrations to heal. It also has the vibration of coherency, and I'm convinced this is the only program anyone would need to heal. Wow. Yeah, everything is vibration, isn't it? So that's powerful.
And I'm just trying to think about, I was just trying to remember something from which resonated with what that person's question was. Is that to do with the vibration on the planet, the different resonance, that's happening? And we know that when this is measured over things like 9/11 or massive tsunamis, this disruption in the world Earth's resonance, which then also links with what is happening with us, and which leads to the work from HeartMath and HeartMath Institute. And I really encourage people to go and look at that, heartmath.org. HeartMath is, apparently there are, and I'm sure they haven't counted them, but on average about 40,000 memory type cells in our physical hearts that are found also in the brain. We're duped into believing that our thoughts are in our head, that we have memory in our head and it's all stored in there, and to some extent probably is true, but there's also 40,000 memory type neurons actually in our hearts. And it seems to be that when we receive information like shocking news or happy news, there is resonance and movement in the heart before it's registered in the brain. And often the belief, certainly in traditional psychology, is that it's the other way around. And we find that when there is greater resonance between the heart waves and the brain waves, it massively increases our focus, it reduces anxiety, it reduces depression. our physical health is affected, and we can learn heart math techniques to get those resonances together. And I've actually got, I don't know if it's a similar device to what this person has who left the question or the comment, but it's a little device you can get off the Heart Math Institute, and you put your finger on it and it'll show your heart, not necessarily your heartbeat, but the heart resonance, and relative to the brain sort of resonance. And it'll start, and there's a little beeping light of red. So when it's red, the redder it is, the further it away from congruence between heart and head. And it's going beep. You got your finger on it and a little light on the machine. Beep, beep, beep. Red. The more you slow down, you start breathing through the heart, it changes color, it goes to green. And when you're in that lovely flow state, and then you ask the person a question. I've done this in workshops where I've had it superimposed on the computer. And then someone will ask them a question about the stressful situation at work. It suddenly goes back to red again. So in an instant, our brains are taken back to that memory of stress or something. And so if this is affecting our heart waves and our ability and what's being projected, how are we spending our times, our thoughts of things, how we are thinking, is if it's negative or we're judgmental or we're harsh towards ourselves or we're not present, that is affecting in turn our own hearts, but actually affecting the resonance of the planet, I'm sure.
Yeah, I wonder if it's the same as a device that a friend of mine in Sydney works with. It takes the resonance of the person's aura. So it sounds like it's quite similar. You actually put your finger on the thing and it measures your energy. And so it actually takes you put each finger on from each hand on it, and it measures what other areas of your body that are related to that fingerprint, and it creates a map of your aura. And then it's actually almost like a diagnostic device that can tell us what we need to work on without actually having to, go to a doctor or, take any kind of invasive test. It actually just tells us preemptively where we can work on. I guess it's almost a bit like iridology, maybe. Not that I know much about iridology, but it looks at where we might have issues within our bodies and what we can, work on. And so they actually use that device to measure energy in rooms, energy of like food, water, and it's so interesting. The vibrations and the frequency and energy, as Tesla said, are the three main things that we really need to understand if we're going to understand the nature of the universe and the nature of the world. So it's it's powerful, and I'm so glad that you are you bring the two of the mind and energy together so much as well, and in such a beautiful balance that and the way that you explain it is really cool. It's in it's quite a very logical, practical, psychological sense, but it also, it's talking about energy, but in a way that I think a lot of people would like to be able to understand, as well as, the way my mind works. It is psychological and it is very logical. I guess it's all quite abstract, isn't it? The mind is such an abstract thing. So is that something that you'd like to, maybe we've got a couple more minutes to speak into the abstract nature of the mind and how we can make it a bit more kind of practical? Does that make sense?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's we've been this sort of mind-body disconnect, which was time in our science when that brain and body, thoughts were things and the body was, or feelings were separated. And we've still got that sort of dualism, or call it also masculine, feminine. If you look at, the more invasive treatments to do with our health, they're invasive, they're very masculine orientated, cut it out, destroy that, kill the disease. Whereas when we have a more feminine approach really to this, we're working with more, healing sort of methodologies and listening to our bodies, and And we've got to integrate both, I think, but we've gone down that thing of, that thoughts are separate and it's all in our head and that sort of thing, and we can master that. And I just see the different tools in a toolbox in many ways. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, awareness. I think there's 3 ways to learn things or become aware in many ways. The first one is, there are our thoughts, our intuition, that gut feeling that says yes and everything else is no. And that's been knocked out of us. Oh, that's all a bit fluffy. That's where's your evidence, people say. But that intuitive feeling of yes or no, that sense of rightness, has kind of been knocked out of us. But just if people listening, think back in your life when you had a real funny feeling about something. It was not quite a feeling, but it was a deep sense of sensation of, that doesn't feel right. I shouldn't go into this relationship. I shouldn't take that job. Something about that person. But we actually push it aside. Where's the evidence? I'm being judgmental. I'm pushing, and we put it aside immediately. So there's that intuition. There's then our emotions. That's sort of reactive, and a lot of that can be unconscious. Emotions, I always say, feelings are not there to be resolved, they're there to be experienced. They put color across something, as opposed to thoughts. Our other form, our third form, is logic and reason. So we've got feelings, we've got thoughts, critical thought in many ways, and then we've got intuition. And we need to bring all those together. It's an arbitrary breaking up in many ways, but I always look at it just as tools in a tool bag. And there was a lovely poem, I can't remember who it was from, a lovely book I read, the first book I read really on these sort of things, called by Joel Kramer, The Passionate Mind, it was called. It goes back to the 70s, I think. I found it in a old bookshop. And he says, we have feelings, but we're not feelings. We have thoughts, we're not thoughts. We have emotions, we're not emotions. We have a body, but we're not a body. This kind of, we're experiencing consciousness through this thing that we call ourselves, our identity. And yet, but we're not that. It's a myth that we are, and it's a myth that we're not. We're embodied consciousness at one level, but in another level where we're not separated from other things. And I think that we tend to think we've got all these thoughts, feelings, actions in ourselves, and they pop out when we're talking to other people. But in fact, we are co-created. The only Lucy I know is Claire, and the only Claire Lucy knows is Lucy. We're unique to each other, and that makes that beautiful. And to try and grasp some of that, there's a lovely book, it's still in print, called On Having No Head. And it's Douglas Harding's work of really getting to realize that it's a myth that we're separate in many ways. And he's got some really cool practical experiments. If you want to check that out, do go. And the Scholland Trust in England was the one that came up with all the different experiments to actually show that, how we get an experience, particularly as Westerners or Westernized people in whatever country we're in, of what perhaps someone who's born into being a Zen Buddhist doesn't have to undo all their conditioning to experience it. But we're going to run out of time, so I haven't really got time to talk about that now. But so have a look at Douglas Harding's work, without a doubt. And become an observer of your own process, I say. And that might sound a little bit strange when people say, I'm so anxious, I feel so guilty. We are tuned to the world through that medium. Guilt is when we feel we've done something wrong. Shame is when we feel we are wrong. But become an observer. Who is the observer through all your life that says, I feel shame, I feel guilt? The person who says they're feeling like that, the person who says I'm anxious, is not anxious. The person who's telling, I always say, the person who's telling me they're depressed isn't depressed, or the aspect of the person. And so become that silent observer, and actually that ethereal self, that existential self, and realize we're having a physical experience. But when people are caught in the grip of pain and trauma and loss and grief, it's very real, and we want to experience those and feel them, but we really grow when we give up pain, not when we just go through it. And turn it into something. If I may swear, we turn our shit into compost.
That's so funny. Yeah. I guess it comes back to, yeah, it's the observation, it's awareness of our own selves from a higher perspective, and really seeing our behaviors, our patterns, our witnessing our thoughts and our emotions, and letting them go, well, experiencing them and letting them go, and yeah, our self-talk, how we speak to ourselves, how we treat ourselves, how we treat ourselves is a reflection of how others treat us is a reflection of how we treat ourselves, I guess, and vice versa, probably both. So it's, yeah, self-love comes back to being objective and loving and treating ourselves with care and respect.
And gratitude, I think, as well. And we hear about gratitude and what can I be grateful for? I've got a warm bed at night, I had 3 meals today. You know, we tend to sort of be grateful for the things that we like. But I always remember, I could tell you exactly where I was going on a course in Hawaii. You know, I had a great pleasure and luck to go there at the time. And I'm sitting in a cafe in Starbucks having a fruit drink or something. It wasn't a coffee, I know it's a cold drink, it was so hot. And this person said to me, I was there so happy that I found gratitude. And this person said, yeah, but you do realize it's being grateful for the bad things that happen to you as well, like you've labeled as bad. And I said, oh gosh, that's a big shift. You know, it was like grateful for life throwing me some real curveballs, and you might have broken up a relationship or had some money worries or health or something. And then we say, oh, but I'm grateful for this. She said, you've got to be grateful for whatever comes your way. She said, because it's an opportunity for learning. And I always remember that. So how can we say, what is the lesson here? What can I learn out of this? You know, because gratitude in many ways is how we release ourselves from the consequences of other people's actions or other people's realities that come into our awareness. But being grateful for that, and you know, it's, you know, bring it on, everyone's hurting me. I don't mean that. But, you know, being aware is, you know, how can I turn this shit into compass, basically, as opposed to holding on to this, saying, why me, why this, why now, why not? You know, it's because if we look back on our lives, it's the major things, the traumas, the losses, the moving of countries, when you became vegan and became aware of this horror story, but that was such a critical incident. We grew tremendously. We just don't want to stay in that pain. We need to turn it into something else and collectively be part of the solution.
Yeah, it's the transmutation of those painful experiences or the painful emotions into something, and it can take a while. It can take quite a while to shift through some of those as well. You know, the dark night of the soul can be a couple of days, it can be a couple of years even for some people. I heard someone said the other day in something that I was listening to, that they went through their dark night of the soul essentially early in the early 2000s, and it took a long time. Things were really, really, really dense back then, and now things have changed so much and things happen so quickly. Time is different, that people are able to go through those experiences so much quicker. And I thought that was really interesting, that seeing the density from their perspective, having experienced it themselves 20 or so years ago, and now seeing that people are actually able to go through these things really, really quickly and transmute things really quickly. It's really interesting. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Do we have time for a little meditation? You mentioned a heart math meditation. Sure. That would be really lovely. That would be cool.
Yeah,
thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And perhaps before we just change the end, you know, I'd like to end, it'd be nice to end on this. You know, I invite people to, when I was talking about those shoulds, oughts and musts, there's a free program. There's lots of freebies on there, things you can do, from Vegan Voices and how to talk about veganism. It's a 30-day program. But also, if you go to veganpsychologist.com/myths, that's M for mother, Y for Yankee, T for Tommy, H for Henry, S for sugar, myths. And there's a 4-part little mini video program on just seeing where we've got the blind spots, because we raise the veil about veganism. We often say, well, why people change? When we look at those blind spots that we've still got about other things, and we can start to understand others and then shape our conversation. So people might like to check that out.
Mm. It sounds really interesting. I'm sure it's relevant for a lot of different aspects of our lives as well. That would be really helpful. Thank
Yeah,
you. Mm.
fantastic, lovely. All right. Okay, so it's a very short meditation, but it's something that is enormously powerful. And the Heart Math Institute, they teach lots of meditations, but it's one that I found particularly helpful. And I say it's to do with that resonance of heart and head. So I'll just get people to close their eyes for a moment, and it'll only just take a few minutes what we're going to do here. And as you know, in all meditation, when we close our eyes, the world changes. We are bringing our energy to the inside. And I always say, just without changing it anyway, just become aware of your breathing. And as soon as we become aware, of course, we tend to, it shifts. We probably slow it down, and then just deepen that breath a little bit. And most of us do what is called paradoxical breathing. Is when we breathe in, our chest comes up. But in fact, with more deep breathing, when we breathe in, our stomach comes out. So we breathe in, it's not our chest. So we're breathing in through the nose, our belly expands. And then we breathe out through the mouth, our tummy goes flatter again. Breathing in, tummy out. Breathing in, sorry, and out, tummy in. I'm going to breathe into the count of 4. And breathe out 4. And just imagine, trace it as it's coming in. So as we're breathing in, we're going to trace it going down into the body and through, and the tummy expanding. So breathing in, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then breathing out through our mouth, 5, 6, 7, 8. So imagine that coming in and coming out. This beautiful flow. And if your mind wanders, just bring it back to there. Now, the power is always in the breath. We're born, from the moment we're born to the moment we die, we're breathing. And when we're in shock and we're angry or upset, we take shorter breaths, and it activates our sympathetic nervous system, which is sympathetic to, we're out of balance. And we know that now through our heart and our head resonance as well, we're out of balance. When we slow down our breathing, and people that do yoga and meditation know this, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So there's a physiological sort of activation that's happening as well. Remember, we're breathing in and the tummy expands, and we're breathing out. So we're tracing it in as it's going down through the body, and then out. Breathing in and out. And just with our awareness, we're going to move that awareness so it comes in and it goes down the left-hand side of the body, which is through the heart. Our heart is on the left-hand side. We breathe through the heart and we breathe out through the heart. We breathe in through the heart. Just imagine that energy coming in through the heart and just passing out as well. Instead of just coming up and down through the body, it's going down through the heart and the belly expanding, and then up through the body and out again. And then I want us to imagine our heart. This time when we breathe, the heart is expanding like a concertina. We breathe in, it expands, and we breathe out, it gets smaller. And we breathe in and it expands, and we breathe out and it gets smaller. And if we were to have that little finger on that little machine at the moment, we'd find our heart and head resonance, and we're gently focusing on this, our expanding heart, and lowering again. We'd find a great resonance there. And then I want you, as you breathe out and that heart expands, send that love or compassion or awareness to someone else. Maybe it's a person that we know. Maybe it's an animal we know. Maybe it's a next door neighbor we don't know. Bring that out. So we expand it. We're sort of letting it expand beyond us. And then it's resonating back up through the heart and out again. And we're breathing in through the heart expands, it expands to that other living being or Mother Earth. And that's, breathe in and out. And so we're almost, the heart is beating and it's weighing in and weighing out, and we're expanding it to someone beyond ourselves. And that is just such a simple little heart math technique, but it is incredibly powerful. And then just bring our body, our awareness back into the room. And maybe just continuing to keep our eyes closed for a moment, but just to remind ourselves is in how we can be of service to others is when we see others that judge us, or we feel angered by something we've seen on social media, start to do this little meditation. And you'll find the outer world changes. People change when we expand love and care to them. Bring it out and bring it in. Okay, meet people where they're at. And often people know something has changed and they don't know why. So many people come to see me in a therapeutic context and they say, I came to see you about a problem, but the problem's kind of going away. My family have started behaving themselves. When we change ourselves, other people change because the field changes. Now, we either just do that energetically, automatically, but when we do this beautiful heart math technique, and just to remind ourselves, we start to breathe in, the tummy expands, and we breathe out. It's coming up through the body and going out, and breathing in and out and there. And then we move the awareness to the left-hand part of the body. So we're breathing in and the air is going down, our tummy's expanding through the heart. And it comes out again. And then we just do that a few times and then bring our minds back if they wander. And then we imagine our heart expanding like a concertina. So this time when we're breathing, the heart's expanding. We breathe out, it lowers. And then we expand that to someone or something outside of ourselves. And we show a level of compassion, maybe for the people that have angered us or have judged us, or people we need to let go of in the past that have harmed us. And we just expand that to them. And we're releasing ourselves from the consequences of other people's actions, but also we're being of service to them and to ourselves. I already feel calmer just doing this. Lovely. And when we're ready, we can come back into the room. Wonderful. And this together with the work by Lynn McTaggart and the power of intention. Come together, bring together a group of other people, of other vegans that, our wounds just have different names, but they're similar in many ways. It's when we feel we've been broken or harmed or shamed in some sort of way, is actually, when we let that go. And it's not to say it wasn't significant, that it was okay, but when we release ourselves from those consequences, and then we can be of service and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
We should just rather shift the energy.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I definitely needed that. I'd like to just stay there forever, to be honest. I wish I could just.
You can go there anytime, just for moments, and be doing it on the train, doing it in a traffic jam, and then people probably wave to you and smile.
Yeah, they feel the shift. Yeah, really powerful.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really beautiful.
Thank you to you. And Paradise Rising, I think, is something I've seen evolve over a period of time. And I really encourage people to share this, be part of this, because coming into the space, doing the work, being an instrument for change, we do need to resource ourselves. I encourage people to be more active in their activism, spreading the message, getting it out there, inviting people into the social injustices that are happening to be part of the solution. But we have to resource ourselves to be able to do that, and to do it over a period of, a long period of time. So great.
Yeah, you've seen it evolve right from the beginning. I think it's definitely been an organic experience. It's just kind of a reflection of where I am in my life, and everything that I'm doing is just it's an unfolding. It's not there are plans and there are things that are orchestrated, but it just all kind of comes together very naturally and organically. So it's interesting, and thank you for encouraging people to be part of it as well, because it takes a lot for one person, and it takes a lot less for everybody to actually come together and do it all together. So I'm grateful for
Yeah.
the amazing community that we're all building together and
Yeah.
sharing this
Absolutely.
magic. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
being part of this event, and all the work that you do so much, and it's so powerful, and it really makes such a massive difference. So I
Yeah.
just want to acknowledge you for
Absolutely.
that. Thank you.
Thank you. And go and I say to people, go and watch the other recordings. I'm going to catch up on them. I only was able to come into one live. But, you know, go and catch up. A lot of work goes into these things, you know, and Lucy's put so much work into this as the architect of this, you know, and share it because, you know, she's chosen people wisely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm honored to be the vessel, I guess, to have it flow through me. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Great.
Um,
All right.
yes,
Lovely.
thank you. And yeah, thank you so much to everyone who's joined us. Thank you, Kim. And yeah, we'll connect again, Claire, soon, I'm sure. No, yeah.
Great. See you soon. Thank you to everyone. Keep shining.